I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. The USMNT won't take the field again until their September friendlies against South Korea and Japan, but that doesn't mean the next few months will be quiet for the player pool. On today's show, we're going to break down the key storylines to watch between now and September, such as the summer transfer window, European preseason camps, and the second half of the MLS season. To help me do all of that, I've invited Ryan Tolmich to join the show. Ryan is the American soccer correspondent for Goal. So Ryan, let's talk about the summer transfer window first. There's already been a number of moves involving U.S. players. Either they are, official, or it's just a matter of completing maybe some final paperwork. Of the moves we know about already, which is the one that stands out to you the most?
It's tough. It was like you said, this is the big time. With a World Cup a year away, these are the risky moves, the ones you can't get wrong. When you're early in a World Cup cycle, you can kind of bet on yourself or take a step back, and you can kind of do different things to try and position yourself. But now, like this is the club you're going to be with at the business end of this cycle. So that's the interesting thing to think about when you look at all these. And I think the real interesting one for me is Malik Tillman. Just because he has taken a very obvious and very noticeable step up, coming off the heels of a summer where he did that with the national team. I think everyone was looking for him to have those true signature superstar performances this summer, and he had a few of them, and now he's stepping into a team that just lost Florian Wirtz, who's one of the best playmakers in the world, and he's going to be filling that role there in Leverkusen. So yeah, I think that's the obvious one is like, okay, we're going to find out how good Malik Tillman really is. Is he just a very good player, or can he be a star for one of the better teams, not just in Germany, but in the world? So yeah, that's the one that I'm kind of looking at right now.
Yeah, and it is a risk, right? Because he's you'd say he's pretty solidly in the team, right? After the Gold Cup, definitely in the team. We're even talking about him being in the starting 11, at this point. But at PSV, he was guaranteed to be one of their best players. Going to get his goals and assists as long as he stayed healthy. At Leverkusen, we think that could happen. But the opposite could happen as well. I mean, there's always a chance, he could disappoint and hurt his World Cup chances. I think everyone points to Ricardo Pepi's move to Augsburg as the kind of cautionary tale in making the wrong move before the World Cup. So that will be real interesting to see. I'm excited to see it. I mean, I'm excited to see him in the Bundesliga with a new team.
It's a cool move. It's one that, like I said, you could kind of see the upside, and that it's like, all right, this club needs a player that can create, that can do things. It's obviously not an unfamiliar scenario for him, having grown up in Germany and having played at Bayern Munich. So he'll know exactly what he's walking into. The expectations that he's played with throughout his career. If you look at the clubs he's played for, whether that's Bayern, Rangers, or PSV, there's no off days for any of those clubs. Those are clubs that know how to deal with expectations. So he shouldn't be overawed by any of that. The question is, when you're stepping into a better team, how do you handle the level? How do you handle the tactics? How do you handle the manager? Like, there's just so many different unknowns whenever you move to a new club. So yeah, that's the one that's interesting for me, because when you look at Tillman, he's a player with such high upside, obviously. And the question is, how do you reach that upside? And you could have gone two ways, which is it to put up 15 and 15 for PSV this season and call it a day? Or is it to challenge yourself by going to a club that won the league just, a little over a year ago? So yeah, it's an interesting one, because there's so many different ways that it can go. And it's very clear that Tillman is going to be a key part of this. And we'll have to see how this move really impacts that.
Yeah, I like that he's betting on himself.
Absolutely.
And you can see the natural career progression, going from Rangers to PSV, now to Leverkusen. They're each a step up. Maybe you would argue this one's like a really big step up, but I like that he's betting on himself. And if he does well there, I mean, he could really, really cement himself as one of the key players, in the starting 11. Some other guys I think just worth mentioning before we move on, Damian Downs going to Southampton. Johnny Cardoso. I still don't think his move is like official yet at Atletico Madrid, but
There's
we're
a
just kind
couple
of
of them
waiting
that
on.
are still just hanging around. You know, there's
like
a
Patrick
few.
Agyemang.
There's a few of them that seem close, you know, but you know we all know how summer transfer windows go, and it's never done until you see the guy holding the shirt up. So that's one of the things you have to understand is that while these are all pretty close, you never know what can happen in the end. So it's let's not assume is what we'll say.
Just ask Duncan McGuire.
Yes, that is the perfect example.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some of the guys where it's mostly rumors at this point. You know, we're seeing different ties to different clubs. Maybe some other guys, there's not much talk at all. Which one of those, you know, U.S. internationals that, you know, you're hoping to see a move? There's some rumors out there. You know, which is the one that really stands out to you that you just are really keeping an eye on where their next move is going to be?
I mean, there's the obvious big one that is Gio Reyna, and that everyone's kind of wondering what the heck he's going to end up doing, because he is very much in soccer limbo and needs to figure out how to get out of it. You know, having wasted essentially 4 years of his career in the most pivotal years of development. And there are so many questions now of what is his fitness level like? What's his confidence like? What's his development path going forward? Will he ever reach the ceiling that everyone really thought he was going to have? So that's an interesting one, but it's also not one that will directly impact the U.S. right now, I'll say, in a way, and that, like we were just saying, that it looks like Tillman has that attacking midfielder spot pretty well, you know, shored up. You know, you have someone like Diego Luna who could also play there. Like, realistically right now, and it's weird to say, the U.S. doesn't need Gio Reyna. Like, it's a nice to have more so than a have to have. So because knowing that, like, there are some have to haves that need to be figured out, whether that's goalkeeper with Matt Turner, whether that's, you know, is anyone in the center back pool going to step up, you know, whether that's someone new making a move, whether that's, you know, someone that's going to, you know, take a leap with their club. You know, there's so many other positions that you kind of have to look at and figure out. But yeah, for me, obviously it's Gio Reyna, just because there's so much upside there. And the question is if we're ever going to really see it again. So he'll have to get that right, whether that's coming back to MLS, whether that's taking a step back to a lower league, whether, you know, whatever it is, like, he has to get it right. So that's the really interesting one, because it has such long-term ramifications, not just on this World Cup, but on what this guy's career is going to look like going forward.
Yeah, it's huge for him. I mean, I think he's on the outside looking in of even making the World Cup roster at this point, which sounds crazy because a lot of people think of him as like the highest ceiling, but I don't think he's top of mind for Pochettino at all. I don't, you know, he got called into that one camp where he hardly played, just almost kind of like a meet and greet, it seemed. So I think he's going to have to, he has a long road ahead of him, I think, to work himself back into a 23, 26 man roster.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think there's an attachment there from Mauricio Pochettino in the way that there would be for a different manager. And the way, you know, that I've always thought of this is that, you know, Mauricio Pochettino probably looks at Gio Reyna and says, I could see 50 of him in Buenos Aires if I walk down the streets, you know? So there's no attachment there. You know, Mauricio Pochettino's thing is you have to perform, and you have to perform now, and you have to do it in the right way. And if you're not performing, then I'll find somebody else who will. And, you know, there's no emotional attachment. There's no, oh, this is high upside, because at the end of the day, his whole job is the 2026 World Cup. So his thing is, who can I get that will perform right now? And if you're not that guy, then you're not that guy. And that's what makes these transfers so interesting, because it can't be bigger picture. It has to be right now. And that's a tough spot to be in when you're making a move that ultimately will decide the rest of your career.
Yeah, I think about that sometimes. Posh's different perspective, you know, because of where he's been. And you mentioned that he'll walk down Buenos Aires and see 50 players like that. I also think he's seen plenty of players, young players with like super high ceilings that didn't work out or never reached that ceiling. And so he's like, maybe this is a guy, you know, like that. You never know. I mean, we've heard rumors. It seems like almost every league I've heard there's a potential rumor of like Gio Reyna going there. The latest one seems to be LAFC and MLS. I mean, if he comes back to MLS, is that a huge, I don't know. I guess it's a drop down, but I mean, do you think it's really bad if he comes to MLS, or do you think he can get some positives out of it?
I mean, I think it's an admission that things have gone wrong, but I think it would also be silly to not admit that things have gone wrong. You know what I mean? Like, obviously no player wants to come back to MLS at his age, you know, when you started at Dortmund and all this hype and you're playing with Haaland and Bellingham and you're doing all these things, you know, coming back to MLS at that age is admittedly saying that things didn't work out the way they're supposed to. But I think at this point, putting your head down and pretending that everything's worked out is silly. And that's kind of the way that this has been treated so far, and that, you know, he stayed an extra year at Dortmund because, you know, we could prove ourselves, and he went to Nottingham Forest on loan instead of going to a club where he could attack and flourish and play. And so much of his career has been very much dictated by doing the things that they thought Gio Reyna should be doing rather than the things that Gio Reyna could actually do right now. So that's the most interesting thing for me, is like, all right, are the people around him, is Gio or whoever, going to have the humility to be like, look, we have to do something different because what we've done hasn't worked. And if that is going to MLS, if that's going to Portugal, the Eredivisie, or you know, the lower league, like whatever it is, like you have to eat that humble pie a little bit and say like, hey, if we're going to get this thing back on track, we have to take a step back and look at different ways to do things, because so far what's happened hasn't worked over these last few years for various reasons, whether that's injury, form, coaching, like whatever it is, but something's got to change. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah. I think I was hoping for Eredivisie. I mean, one of the top teams, you know, there, because I thought that would be a good step back, but still like pretty high up there. But I think he's got the data points of how much Pochettino actually believes in MLS players. I mean, he's given all these MLS players like lots of chances. And so I would think that maybe gives him a little bit more confidence to make a move like that to a team like LAFC or MLS, because he sees Poch giving all these MLS players, you know, opportunities.
Absolutely. And that leads to another transfer that's interesting, is that, you know, you mentioned the Patrick Agyemang thing. And that's what's so interesting about his move, is because it's such a big risk in that right now, like, look, he's, you know, within MLS doing his thing for Charlotte. He's, you know, probably right now on the World Cup roster as the third striker. And like, now you're taking that risk where you're going to a championship, which is a good league, you know, like probably better than MLS, but not overwhelmingly better to the point where that's going to solidify your place. And there's going to be more pressure to score now, and you're going to have to go out and get goals. And now you're directly going to be compared to your Josh Sargents and your Haji Wrights, so your Damian Downs of the world, because you're going to be in the same environment. So now you're at a point where you're really betting on yourself. And I understand it. And for Patrick Agyemang, and that, like, look, one, he's going to make a life-changing amount of money in this deal, and that's very important. And let's not take away the fact that these guys, this is their job and they got to provide and they got to do all these things, but it is a risk with the World Cup coming up, because if he stayed here, banged in double digits goals for MLS, he probably had the inside track. But now, you know, you're opening the door a little bit to some risk, and that's what's so interesting about that. And that's, you know, one of the things that I think where it makes so much sense for a guy like Diego Luna to probably just stay another year, put up 15 and 15 at MLS, and then go to Mauricio Pochettino and go, look, man, I've been performing. There's no doubt here. Let's do it. So yeah, that's one of the things where, look, if you're someone in MLS, it's going to be a risk to leave right now. And that's the thing you're going to have to weigh is this move better than me putting up good numbers in this league? Because if it's not, then, you know, you're really kind of gambling your World Cup future on it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Agyemang, that one seems to be, I know we talked about it's not a done deal, but him going to Derby County, it seems like that's going to happen. Diego Luna, there's a lot of rumors at this point, but it doesn't seem like we've had anything real solid. But he is the one guy in MLS I think I'm watching to see if he moves, because he's in a good spot now. And it seems like if he just keeps doing what he's doing, he's got a pretty firm hold on making that World Cup roster. But if he moves, especially as a guy that needs to score, I guess Agyemang the same way. If you're a guy that needs to score goals to like stay in the running, it'll just be interesting to see how it turns out.
Yeah, the Luna situation is super interesting to me, because he, like you said, he's in such a good spot in some ways, because he gets to be the guy in RSL where everything runs through him, and he's going to have the ball and he's going to do all these things. And, you know, I sat with him in January and we were talking just about how much the roster changed, and that they lost so many attacking players, and Chicho Arango was gone, and like there was going to be so much pressure on him to be that creative force. And he was like, I love it. Like, I love love that I have to carry that. I know I'm going to do this for my team. Like, this is exciting that they're betting on me because I'm betting on myself to be able to live up to that. And that's big, you know, and I think it's good for a player, especially his age, to play with that pressure, for, at least for now. Like, look, is Europe going to come calling at some point? Probably. But for the next year, it's probably pretty good for him to just put up numbers at RSL, continue to do what he does under Pochettino with the national team, and go from there. You know, I think he's in a good spot. And like I said, it's risk versus reward. You know, I think right now he's another player with a pretty good line to a World Cup spot, so he doesn't need to take the risks that some of these other guys necessarily might need to take. So, yeah, for him, he's one that, like I said, I would say if you could stay, because it just makes a little bit more sense to me.
Yeah. I agree with you. Just be, at the very least, be very, very selective about the move that you make. If it's not perfect, you know, or close to perfect, just stay
exactly.
put.
He doesn't need to take a risk.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, just some other guys worth mentioning to keep an eye on. You know, Josh Sargent. Latest rumor I heard from him was Wolfsburg, but I mean, in the Bundesliga. But that one seems to be changing a lot as well. You know, we're still waiting for Matt Turner's move to Lyon to go final. That's a huge one to watch. You know, Tim Weah and Marseille appears to be heading in a positive direction. And then Yunus Musa, I'm curious, but although I haven't been hearing much news about him lately. And then John Tolkien, I'm curious to see if he stays at Holstein Kiel or finds a new home, you know, in one of the top 5 leagues. So lots to watch. Still so much yet to come in this summer transfer window. Let's stay in Europe. You know, all of these, pretty much all the preseason camps, I think, for European clubs are now underway.
Crazy.
I know,
Crazy.
yeah.
Season hasn't even ended yet. The Club World Cup was the end of the season,
I know.
and we're already back at preseason.
That's what was really crazy is I was seeing these pictures of like AC Milan, for example, in their preseason camp, and we were still wrapping up the Club World Cup. But you know, for these preseason camps, you know, when you think about the different U.S. players at those different camps around Europe, is there one in particular you're really keeping an eye on? You know, whether it's due to an injury recovery that they're going through, a player arriving at a new team, or someone fighting for a spot? I mean, who's somebody you're going to be keeping a close eye on in preseason?
So there's a number of contenders here. Look, Serginho Dest, seeing him get healthy is huge to the national team. You know, we haven't seen him for the better part, you know, of year and a half with his ACL injury, and it's very clear that this team doesn't have anyone that can replicate what he brings. So look, getting him healthy is key. Getting Ricardo Pepi healthy is key. Getting these guys fit is important. For the guys, you know, looking to break into teams, whether that's your Yunus Musas, like that's huge for him to go into this AC Milan preseason and have a chance to potentially prove himself. But the one that's most interesting for me for a totally different reason is Christian Pulisic. Just because, look, he took this summer off to rest. He took his break. He's going into this camp, in theory, well rested and ready to go and ready to start this season. And the thing is now is when you take off the summer and you say that you need it for rest, like you better look good to start the season. Because if you come out and you're sluggish to start the season, or you're not fit, or like whatever these things are, then the questions are going to come, why'd you take the summer off? So that's the thing. I don't think there's an American player under more pressure to perform in the first few months of the season than Christian Pulisic. And it's not for a transfer thing or for his place. Like that stuff's fine. It's that he now has to kind of justify his decision from this summer. And that has become a little bit more difficult over these last few weeks, just given the back and forth. So yeah, that's the interesting one, because look, like I said, he has to come in fit, he has to be ready, and he has to have a good start to the season. So that is the one that's interesting for me, just because it's such a cloud that kind of is going to hang over him until it doesn't. So I want to see how he kind of handles it all going into the season, and then whether that impacts his status for September or October or whatever, because this is a story that's not going to really go away until he starts scoring again. So that's kind of where that's at.
He's got a new coach at Milan. He's going to have a lot of new players around him to get used to. So, yeah, and he's going to be around the media a lot, asking him questions. I mean, there's this whole relationship with Pochettino we're all wondering about. And so just seeing how each of them speak about it in the next couple months will be, you know, interesting as well. The one, for me, it's Ricardo Pepi. And he's probably we're talking about what to watch between now and September. I mean, I really think my number one storyline that I'm kind of really keeping an eye on is Ricardo Pepi, because I still feel like he's in the driver's seat to be the starting striker for this U.S. men's national team. I haven't seen enough from Balogun yet to make me think that he's actually pushing Pepi, that hard. And I think Pepi's in the best club spot of all of them. I mean, it's just the only concern is the injury recovery. It's like, and so that's why I want to watch him in preseason. Like, how many minutes is he getting in the friendlies? How does he look? I mean, I saw some pictures today that he's going to wear the number 9 jersey at PSV. So it just seems like, on paper, he's going to be the starter going in. But it's like, is he healthy enough? Does he come back from his injury and get back to full speed quickly enough to where he hits the ground running for PSV as their starting striker at the beginning of the season? Because if he does, I mean, I could see him scoring 20, 30 goals, this season, and just he's going to be in a great spot. Of all these guys we talk about, I mean, he just seems like he's going to be in such a great spot as long as he's healthy enough and doesn't have any lingering effects from that injury. And I'm just so curious to see, how that works out.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just because, every position you want guys who are playing well going into a World Cup. That matters at every position. But striker and goalkeeper are a little bit different in that those two are the ones that are almost exclusively going to be picked on form. And that if you're not playing and you're not playing well, it doesn't matter what you bring stylistically or what you could do here and here. Like, you have to be playing well. So that goes for the goalkeeper position, whether that's Matt Turner, Matt Freese, whoever it is. Like, you have to be playing well. And that goes for the striker, because at the end of the day, Ricardo Pepi knows it more than anyone. And that if you go a few months without scoring at Augsburg leading to a World Cup, you're not going to be on the roster. So it's the same thing at the top end too, where, you're going to see Ricardo Pepi and Flo Balogun, in theory, hopefully, kind of dueling with each other to try and make the difference and to show why they should be the guy. And obviously it's not apples to apples with the different leagues and everything going with that. But look, these two guys are going to have to go out and prove it. And, I know Mauricio Pochettino will hope that they try and one-up each other all year long and go from there. But yeah, like you said, Ricardo Pepi's one that's in a situation where he's shown he could score goals at this level. The question is, can he do it for an extended period of time? And, he's in a position where he hopefully should be. And if that's the case and he's scoring goals and he hits the numbers that you were talking about, then he'll probably be starting at the World Cup. And that's the situation. So yeah, it's all about him finding himself again and really proving that he could do it for a whole season, hopefully without anything significant happening.
Yeah, and he has already built some equity with Mauricio Pochettino as well. I mean, he came in his early camp, scored some goals, whereas Balogun hasn't even been at camp yet, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so there's absolutely no equity there.
I said he was in very briefly, ahead of this, but, we haven't seen him play a game under him. We haven't seen tactically how he'd like to use him. We haven't seen, what the fit is with, someone like Diego Luna or there's just so many questions about Balogun at this time because we haven't really seen him with this group under Pochettino or what any of that will look like. So, does Pochettino go with 2 strikers? Who knows, man? That's the thing is we don't know yet. So that's such a question mark. And like I said, he's another one to watch because he had a tough season last season with injury too. So, what can he do going into this season to make sure that he really gets going like he did in his pre-Monaco season in the French league?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully what you kind of alluded to does happen is that those two just push each other the whole season or trying to one up each other. That's what I think we all want. We would love to see. Let's go to MLS. Poch has shown that he's really entrusting these MLS players, right? And so we can't talk about what to watch for over the next couple months without talking about the MLS-based players, and that's gotten even more true as Poch's tenure has gone on. So when you think about those players in MLS, is there one person in particular you're going to be keeping a close eye on over these next couple months?
So I think a lot of guys during the summer proved that they could be on a World Cup roster. There are guys who went out there and kept themselves in the picture. Whether that's, I thought Sebastian Berhalter showed that he could do something on a World Cup roster. You would think back to like Kellen Acosta last cycle, where it's like come in, be chippy, and deliver a hell of a free kick. Like that's a person you could have on the bench. Someone like Alex Freeman showed that there's incredible upside and that he could be the backup for Serginho Dest, and he could do all these things, and that's great. Right now, there's 2 MLS players that I'm really looking at because those are 2 guys that could start, not just contribute. And the first is Matt Freese because, look, obviously he's going to have to figure out, or Pochettino's going to have to figure out the Matt Turner situation. How does he weigh all that? But right now, Matt Freese has shown that he could play. So can he continue to build on that and stay as the number 1 by continuously being one of the better goalkeepers in MLS? And the other one for me is Tim Ream, in that, he's at Charlotte FC. He's performing. He hasn't shown a drop off yet. But, we all know that Father Time is undefeated. And at some point, it's going to get him. So the question is can he fight Father Time for another, 11 months or so? And look, for some of these guys, it comes quickly, and that suddenly you lose that half a step, and that's it. Tim Ream has successfully avoided that for the last 3 years. He was telling us at the Gold Cup that, look, everyone wrote him off after Qatar and said that was his World Cup and that it would be over, but here he is. And he was saying, look, since he's made it this far, he might as well continue on for another, 12 months and try and do it again. So that's the thing, is he's motivated, but, at the end of the day, can motivation stave off, something that gets every player at one time or another? So those are the 2 I'm watching on. Can Tim Ream keep it up? And can Matt Freese really push Matt Turner and perhaps even win that spot? So those are the 2 that I think are the big interesting ones.
Yeah, when I go back to the early days of this podcast, which I started after the 2022 World Cup, and I would talk with people about matches after that World Cup, and I would say, other people would say all the time, why is Tim Ream starting? There's no way he's going to be there in 4 years, so give somebody else the opportunity. You know what I mean? It was a given he wasn't going to be there, but the truth is nobody has taken the position from him. And like you said, he's hung around, he's stayed healthy, and now he seems to be in pole position, to be in the starting 11 as long as he does stay healthy and doesn't have any of those, sudden decreases in performance, that you mentioned. Let me get your opinion on something, because we're going to talk about the friendlies next. And, this September friendly to me is going to be so interesting to see how Poch, who he sends out there, who he brings into the roster, but then who he sends out there in the starting 11. And I know you were in the room after the loss to Mexico in the final at the press conference when, Henry Bushnell, I asked him that question about how he was going to reintegrate player, how he's going to reintegrate the he didn't call them first team players, but the Christian Pulisic, the big names back in the lineup, and he was just Poch, his response, he just seemed flabbergasted that somebody would assume that all these players, that we're going to say goodbye to all these players that have been playing in the Gold Cup just so easily, and then he's going to hand the spot to the people that weren't there, and so. What I'm curious to see is all these players that we think of as the stars of the team, Pulisic, McKennie, Weah, Anthony Robinson, all these guys, is he just going to plug them back in for that first friendly in September? Or does he want to reward these players that played at the Gold Cup? Has he built a really special bond with them, which it seems that he has? And he's going to keep them in there and make these other players kind of re-earn their spot. I mean, what's your feel on which of those 2 scenarios is going to happen and how he's going to handle that?
I think this is the most interesting thing in general because there's so many layers to it. The first is that this generation of players has been told they're the golden generation for 6 years. And you have a guy in Mauricio Pochettino who has walked in and does not give a damn about that. He does not care about any of that because he doesn't come from a place were they named golden generations because they're always having talented players. So his thing is there's always more, there's always someone who wants it, there's always someone who will perform for me, and we're not going off of this idea that you guys were around last time and that means you're going to be around forever because you're the generation who's changing things. That does not matter to him. His job is to win the World Cup games, and that's it. And whoever he thinks is going to be the guy to do that, that's that. And if you are messing around or you don't believe in that as much as he does or all these things, that's that. So that's the thing, is he drew that line in the sand this summer and said, look, I'll take the less talented guys if they're going to buy in and do things the right way and develop the relationships with each other the way I want them to. And if that means having to leave off guys who are pretty good, so be it. And that was sort of the message that was sent this summer, not just to the Christian Pulisic's and Weston McKennies and Gio Reyna's, those guys, but also to the Josh Sargents and Tanner Tessmans and Joe Scalli's and the guys who were actually left off this roster, because they were told, like, hey, look, guys, like, the message is clear here, and that you've been left off this roster for football decisions, and that's because I want to look at these guys. So that's the big thing, is how long will this game of, I don't want to call it a game of chicken, but how long can this go on? And that there's a World Cup coming, and at the end of the day, regardless of whatever you want to admit, there's only so many World Cup quality players in this team. A lot of them are the guys that we've mentioned are the big names. So what does Mauricio Pochettino do to reintegrate them? Because, look, at the end of the day, he needs them next summer. So how long can this go on? Does he change things up in September and stick with the Gold Cup guys? Does he, lean back on them and be like, all right, message sent, this is fine now? But, like, that's the thing, is there is this culture moment going on right now where there's this big discussion of who can believe they're in, who should be in, who definitely in. And at the end of the day, no one should be feeling they're definitely in. And that's kind of the message he's sending. And the question is if it's been received already or if he needs one or two more windows to kind of send it.
Do you have do you have a feeling on which way you think he's going to go? Because I personally wouldn't be surprised at all if he rolled out a starting 11 very similar to the one he rolled out against Mexico in this first September friendly.
So the thing is look, this is not insider, this is just personal. It's tough because of where we are in the cycle and that there is a finite amount of games left. And if you were 2 years out, this would absolutely be the time to set a tone and set the culture and be like, forget this is what we're doing. But the longer this goes on, the less opportunities you have to work with those guys. We just mentioned, just using Flo Balogun as an example, we haven't seen him under Pochettino yet. We haven't seen Serginho Dest yet. We haven't seen a full strength team under Mauricio Pochettino yet. And the time is running out for that to happen. And you don't want to just show up at a World Cup and roll out 11 guys that hadn't played together yet and see what happens. So that's the thing, is there's a finite amount of time to figure this out. Can he afford to figure it out another game or two? That's the big question, isn't it? I said, I think it's going to be an interesting one, and I think it might also come down to a player-by-player basis on, what guys he wants to reward and what guys he thinks need to hear this message one more time. Like, I don't think it's an all-or-nothing proposition here, but I do think that this is still a thing that is important to him, like you said, based on that one answer in that final press conference. And, he said earlier in the tournament that he wasn't a mannequin and that he was the one making the decisions, not the players. So it's something that I think is going to linger over this group going forward. And I think it's something that's important to him, and it's important to this team to kind of figure out who is going to get the chance to show themselves and the lessons they've learned earlier, and who's going to get the chance to show that they've learned those lessons maybe a little bit later.
Yeah. The other thing he said consistently since his very opening press conference when he was announced as the head coach was he thinks there's plenty of time. Everyone's always asked him, can you do it in the time frame? And he's like, I think we have plenty of time. I've never once heard him say we're running out of time. We only have 8 friendlies left or whatever. So, you can think he's crazy for that. You can disagree with him on that. And maybe that's just a front that he's putting out there. But one thing I've heard him say consistently over and over is he thinks he has plenty of time. Yeah. And so I think he thinks he has still some matches to work with to figure out the starting 11, maybe to send some messages to players.
I will say, to his point, I think this summer was a pretty good example of that. in that they had that run up leading up to the tournament, where you had those two friendlies, which were bad. Bad results. There were a lot of mistakes in there, but you had that time to train and get to know each other and learn about each other. And that is something that isn't the luxury you have with friendlies like you have in September, October. So you have a day or two of training realistically during those windows. So that is the thing is realistically, there's only so much you can learn in these friendlies because of that. The training time just isn't there. So I think he does believe that realistically he gathers a group next year for the World Cup. They train for a few weeks. They have some friendlies, and that team will be ready by that point. And, there's merit to that argument and that discussion. But yeah, like I said, it's a tricky one to balance. Like, all right, how are this all going to interact and work together and figure it all out? And there's just so many different layers to it, which is what makes this such a fascinating storyline to watch over the next, year to see how everyone really fits in under him going forward.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure he's going to continue to surprise us as he's done. So that's maybe the one other thing I'll touch on as something to watch for in these next couple months is what are the other friendlies that the U.S. are going to play this fall? I'm curious to see which other ones get announced. We know in September they're going to play South Korea and Japan. We know in October now they're going to play Ecuador and Australia. We haven't heard who the two friendlies are in November. I heard rumors that one of them could be Argentina. But that's just rumors at this point. So you would think in the next couple months, we'll get an idea maybe, of who those November friendlies will be. And then we'll kind of have the full slate of fall friendlies, ahead of us. Have you been happy with what they've named so far? Do you think these are quality friendlies that are going to help the team?
I think these are, I don't want to say perfect friendlies, but they're of the right level that you want, and it's the same caliber of opponent, I guess we could say, as like Switzerland and Turkey. And these are the teams in the, like 15 to 30 world ranking range. These are the types of teams that you run up against at a World Cup group stage. And these are the ones that you have to beat. If you're in a group, you're going to have the team that's just looking back at the last cycle, you're going to have your England that you're probably going to lose to. You're going to have your Wales that's going to be a tough game, and you're going to have your Iran that you're going to, in theory, think you're the favorite in. So you have to play those teams that are going to be the tricky ones, the ones that are going to be hard to break down, or the ones that you can overpower, or the ones that can counter on you, the ones who might have the ball. Like, you have to play the teams that will give you challenges, because ultimately the teams up top are probably going to beat the snot out of you anyway, and the ones below you are not too different than the ones you'll play in CONCACAF. So that's the fun part, is that all of these teams, you would say, are on a pretty equal playing field with the U.S., and that these are all good teams. These are all teams that would like to make it out of the group, that would like to go on a run, that think they'll have a chance at doing so. So yeah, this is good experience for them, because these are the types of teams that they're going to have to beat next summer if they're going to get to where they want to go. So yeah, I think that part's exciting. It's a good test of where this team is. Are they a team that's going to be favored to get out of the group, or are they a team that's going to have some work to do to get out of a group? And I think these friendlies will answer some of those questions a little bit.
Yeah. Fully agree. I can't wait to see these matches. They're matches that the U.S. is going to have to play well, if they want to win, and can't wait to watch them. Well, Ryan, thank you again for coming on the show. I'll make sure and put links in the show notes to your X account, which is at Ryan Tolmich, and also to your work at Goal. Thanks again for coming on the show.
No, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Like I said, it's a wild time for the U.S. men's national team right now, and it feels like it's just getting started. It's a fun run up to the World Cup, and it's really just getting going. So yeah, it's fun, man. That's all I could really say.
Yeah. We're at an exciting place right now. It's just going to keep building and building from here. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or the follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.